session as part of the Looking Forward Back Symposium. And our focus is on ecological commitment, and I'm very glad to have a very nice group here as our panel to reflect on the past and also projection for the future. We have a pretty nice or broad spectrum here, representation of that. So we have people who just graduated and people who have been here for decades. So we have Zoe Hamstead, who just joined us last month or 2 months ago from the new school. And we have Wendy Kellogg. She joined here last night from Queensland State, and she's a professor and chair in the Urban Planning and Environmental Studies, Queensland State. We also have Professor Bill Page from Urban and Regional Planning, and we're also delighted to have Lynda Schneekloth to spare us some of her happy and but busy retiring time here. And we also have Chris Osterhoudt. Nice spell. He is a 2005 M.Arch graduate. 2015, sorry. Okay, we will be following this order on this booklet. Unfortunately, we didn't get time to add Chris' name there. He will be talking mainly on the Grow House project. So let's start with, one more thing. Every panelist will get about 10 minutes, and then we'll open the floor to the audience. So let's get started with Zoe.
So ecology from a disciplinary perspective is about interactions among organisms and within their environment. But when we think about ecology from the perspective of an urban planner or with respect to urban systems, it's not just about ecological processes and functions, it's also about things like social practices, governance regimes, technological infrastructure, so transportation infrastructure, energy infrastructure, and economic conditions, and really the interactions that are happening across all of these domains. So if we're thinking about, how should cities transition to more sustainable and resilient futures, we ought to be taking that holistic systems perspective. But we were asked to think about ecological commitments within the context of teaching and training future generations of urban planners. And these are really heady, large, difficult concepts to get your hands around. These are concepts that academics and scholars have been thinking a lot about, but how do we teach that in the classroom? Well, as Leanne mentioned, I'm a new faculty member and haven't been teaching very long, so I don't really know how we teach that, but I can tell you the kinds of techniques that I've tried in the short experience that I have had. So I taught an environmental studies geographic information systems course in New York City, where from the very beginning we go out into the field and start collecting data. So this image is showing my students in Tompkins Square Park, and we were very fortunate to have the Parks Department staff come and help train our students on how to assess tree health. So they did things like collect diameter breast height, they identified tree species, they collect information about leaf litter, and they also did social surveys. So not just thinking about the ecological health of the park and what kinds of ecosystem improvements park managers might be thinking about, but also how are people getting to parks, what are they using them for, from how far are they traveling, what kinds of transportation infrastructure are they using. And of course, we work to map all of this, so tying these kinds of field experiences into the technical training and skill building that we're working on in the context of a geographic information systems course. So, I think part of the answer to that question from my limited experience is that, getting out into the field and having these hands-on experiences to ground these really huge, complex concepts is one way in which we can train future generations. And the other component of ecological commitments that's really important to me from my perspective is, it's not just a commitment to a way of thinking, but it's also a commitment to the community, so to the other organisms of our species and organizations. So one of the things that we did in this class is we had client-based projects with clients ranging from a large government agency, the New York City Housing Authority, which is responsible for housing or maintaining housing for 600,000 New Yorkers. So it's like a city unto itself, down to a small nonprofit that is a steward of a watershed in a smaller neighborhood in Brooklyn. And in these projects, students would do things like assess the kinds of services that people who live in New York City Housing Authority and low-income buildings have access to. And they would look at things like what kinds of services are accessible given particular types of populations. And then they would also do suitability analyses where they assess which areas of a particular neighborhood are appropriate for things like green infrastructure strategies. So they worked with the Gowanus Canal Conservancy on this project to identify areas where they might want to implement green infrastructure projects for stormwater management. So I think that taking this kind of holistic approach can be really challenging, but when you do it in such a way as to apply it to practical problems where students have to navigate the complexity that practitioners have to navigate, you can really ground these concepts that are going to be so important for our future sustainability and resilience of cities. And I just wanted to end on this image. This was something that one of my students drew in our classroom, and I really like it because even though it's a sad GIS cat and it's expressing frustration about having to tackle a hard problem, I think it also expresses the kind of dedication that students feel when they're really committed, so committed that they stay up all night long to work on a project that they feel is really important and potentially going to have practical implications for people and communities. So I will just end there. Thank you, and sorry for the technological trouble.
I do not have a problem, which is unusual for me, but yeah, I guess it's okay. And I do have some notes, but I wanted to make sure I get all the things why it's important for me to, first of all, be here today and to have been here. I did my master's here. I finished in '86 in the planning program. And I went on and got my PhD at Cornell, and then since '93 I've been teaching planning at the Levin College at Cleveland State University. A school that's quite different than this one. We don't have architecture, but we have a lot of policy and planning and public administration. But I've always enjoyed being in that multidisciplinary environment, so it works for me. But I do miss the painting up things on the walls that I got from my during graduate school. So I wanted to talk about just kind of basically what did I learn that I think was really important to me in terms of my ecological commitment, and how did I learn it? And I'll tell you a little bit about from whom, because there were some really important people here to me. And then how I brought that, I guess, to my own practice as a professor. And I've done a lot of work in the community with classes, with some planners I know, and so I have that role as well in my work. So the comment this morning about systems, yeah, that's where I'm at. That's my era. Both here and at Cornell, actually, because one of my minors was in natural resources, so it's ecosystem science sort of builds on the notion of systems. But the first thing that I got from here really was the notion of problem solving and appreciating the complexity of the world and how you really have to try to understand it and how things are interrelated in such ways that we can only barely sort of scratch the surface of most of it. But that for me was how to understand social ecological systems and thinking about natural systems and how they interact, but how the built forms of place can be designed to resonate with the particular place. And Michael Huff's work always was inspirational to me, that we're losing the buildings built by things from our region and the importance of that identity. So I learned how to analyze context and conditions. I TA'd for a wonderful professor named Marilyn Reeves, who was very involved in the undergraduate education here in Environmental Design Studio. And that's where I learned this whole problem-solving process. It was from her, because she had students do that as they worked on their projects. And I've used that ever since in my own thinking and my teaching. And the other person that I learned that way of thinking was from Himi Jamal, who was the person I probably worked with the most in classes. Himi was one of the most lovely people you can imagine. He was a Penn educated architect and planner, and I had him for a couple studios and for classes. And he had us do things like, we designed a board game about rural to urban migration in developing countries, and that sounds pretty simplistic. Oh my gosh, talk about staying up all night. You have to really know what's going on to design a simple board game, down to designing the artifacts, right? So it was so much fun. And one of the things that I took from the work with Himi was I never had a conversation with the man about anything that he didn't pull out a lovely pen and a piece of paper and start diagramming something that we were talking about. And I do the same thing when I'm trying to explain things, not only to students, but to colleagues, and as a way to help me organize my thinking and flow diagrams. And I love Gantt charts, what can I say? It's just something I learned from him and I've used ever since for a very long time to try to help organize and communicate. And I'm not a good drawer at all, but it doesn't really matter if you're just doing boxes. But he was an amazing person. I also worked quite a bit with Professor Monty McHale, and if you knew her, also hard to describe in her influence on me and just her way of being. But she was an artist who came to the university, and I worked in her center. I don't remember the name of it, but she was very connected to future studies, so that's what the center was about. And that's where I became aware of this thing of sustainable development. This would have been, 85? And she knew everyone in the UN that was working on those issues. I helped her do research. I helped organize the materials she had. She knew people at the UN Environment Program, and just a treasure trove of information that she had in that little center. It was really remarkable. So I understood, I'm from Western New York originally, and out there in the boonies, right? And it's like, wow, small town person. She helped me understand this big world that when we're talking about sustainability, it's not really here, it's the whole planet, and always understanding how one connects to that in a holistic way. And helped me actually go to the Nairobi UN Women's Conference in the mid-'80s, and that clearly changed my life. I mean, just to see all the people there, and I met a future Nobel Prize winner, Wangari Maathai, and a trip, and I mean, it was just so amazing. And Professor McHale did everything in her power to make sure that I could help me raise money, connected me with people there, and it led to the topic of my thesis was on women and sustainable development. So it's always been a very important connection to me. That was because of her. The understand how the natural world is so dramatically affected by production and consumption in our economic activities, and how space is created by those processes as well. So planning has to address the economic development part of sustainability as well as the natural world all in one class, I think. So MAGA was important in helping me recognize the long-term importance, how we have to think many decades in the future, and maybe that's not the immediate concern we're trying to address, but has to be always in our mind as planners, is what is the future, and the discussion this morning is quite relevant to that. I have two more examples now, then I'll stop. I was lucky enough to be part of a studio. Now, in my experience, both here and at Cornell, there was not a whole lot of interaction between the planning students and the architecture students, and maybe that's changed here, I hope, but it was always a struggle, and I think it's a tension that exists in most schools. But there was this wonderful studio that Harold Cohen did on health and housing. Like, what do you mean by health and housing? All right, so I get in there, and I'm on a team with 2 architects, and there was a design program, like things, right? Design studies. And the task of the studio was to, each team had a different part of the world, and we had to understand how does housing either threaten or support a healthy person and a healthy people in the community. So our group had, the disease was schistosomiasis, the context was Egypt. We designed a whole village. Now this was a sustainable village, of course, because that's where our heads were at. But we had to really think carefully about water, because you know the cycle of how schistosomiasis is spread. Well, this was one of those make things, and it was so much fun as a planner. The 2 architecture students, many of you are architects, it's probably like really, duh, no kidding. We built a plaster mold on about this thick and about this big, that big. And we cut little blocks of wood and pushed them down into the plaster. I'm thinking, what is this for? I could not envision this. So then the next day, so it dried, and then we covered the whole thing with clay, about an inch of clay, and we let it sit there for a couple days. And then we flipped the whole thing over, and we knocked off all the plaster, and here was this village, like it was buildings. It looked just like a real place in Egypt. I'm thinking, gee, this is amazing. This is just amazing. And so, but we also had to then think about every system in that village. Where do they get water? How do they get food? What's the heating and cooling? All of those issues. And I have to say, working with on that team was one of the best things I did here, because it was definitely interdisciplinary, but it was also so intense. I mean, we were just so excited to be thinking about it. Other groups did Chaga disease, and it was just a really wonderful experience. So that was my learning by doing, literally working with stuff, which planners don't get to do that often. And then the last thing I'll say is Lynda, I'm sure I didn't have you in class, right? But when I was doing my doctorate at Cornell, I decided to work on the Great Lakes, which has always been an interest, but these things called remedial action plans. And I ended up doing case studies of the 6 plans on the Lake Ontario Basin. So it was a very policy planning kind of study. And I went to so many public meetings and talked to people who had been working on the rivers in these cities. And then I ended up talking to Lynda and learning what the urban design group had been doing, and Dr. Bradshaw. And so it was, even after I wasn't here, I was still learning from the professors here, which is how it should be. I think the way that your group has always been about the Buffalo wonderful lesson to me. It is that commitment to place. It's not just place making, it's thinking about the place and what it has and why those elements are so important. And water for me is the thing that I just always come back to. It's what is such an important part of the city. So it's a way of investing emotionally and using one's intellect to try to improve the situation. That was so important when I watched what you guys have done and with the Buffalo River, and because of that, it's been relatively easy for me to make that kind of commitment in Cleveland as well. They're very similar cities. The river is really important. So in just feeling that connection to the natural world is such an important part of why cities are the way they are. I learned that from watching all of you. And the last little thing is that I wouldn't be in Cleveland if it wasn't for David Perry. He spent 2 years as a Levin chair holder at our institution. And I remember walking into his office, he'd just come back, and I applied. I was finishing up at Cornell, I was visiting on around, and I applied at 7 or 8 universities. And he said, well, you applied at Cleveland, right? And I said, what do you mean I didn't? What do you mean Cleveland? He literally picked up the phone, called Norm Krumholtz, who still is hanging around our shop, and said, I have someone, she's sending you her CV today. Like, yes, I will. And when it came down to choosing to go to Clemson or go to Cleveland State, it was the Great Lakes and the water and the people that I knew who were at those institutions. So there's my ecological commitment.
Thank you, Wendy.
So I'm going to try to spend a little time talking about the topic is how the research faculty do at the university leads into the pedagogy, the teaching we do at the university, and how both of those interact with the community. And that's what I'm going to try to cover very quickly. So when I arrived in Buffalo, I had been doing research on contaminated properties, contaminated land. I just finishing a book on international approaches to deal with it. How do you have a problem with this contaminated old industrial land? How do you create a plan and then implement the plan to remediate the contamination and put the land back into productive use? So I very quickly started looking at these sites around Buffalo, and it's a very rich source of those problems. I had lots of things to look at. And I started a course where I take students on field trips. And as a matter of fact, I'm teaching it this semester. In the fall, it doesn't work as well in the spring. January and February are terrible months for field trips in Buffalo. But September and October are wonderful months. And at any rate, I've got 25 of these case studies where I take the students out to these sites. And we look at them and try to learn from them. How do you make a plan to solve a problem? And how do you get the funding? And how do you implement the plan? And I divided those 25 case studies into 3 groups. The first are what we just described, remediate and redevelop. Clean up the contamination, put it back into use. Second are environmental amenities with an opportunity. How do you take an environmental opportunity and do something with it to make the community better, make people's lives better? And the third, I sort of a catch-all category, these other 2 are really done by the public sector. Government policy, whether it's a Superfund at the federal level or state level, requires something to be done. But there's a group here where they're done by the private sector, nonprofits or other private sector organizations. So I have these case studies divided into these categories. So there were 10 in this remediate redevelop cases. The soil's contaminated, the groundwater's contaminated, and you've got to do something with them. I'm going to have an example of one of them to help explain it. But many of you may know the Union Ship Canal in South Buffalo. This is the canal in dark. This is Furman Boulevard. The outer harbor is here. So ships from the Great Lakes brought in iron ore, they brought in coal, put it onto this dock here, and then they put it into furnaces and made pig iron for all the steel mills. And it died and left a history of contamination. Fascinating that actually the worst contamination was up here, where it wasn't waste from this facility, but when this place was abandoned, people dumped toxic waste, PCBs and other things on the abandoned site. So it had problems to fix it. So this is what it looked like, the canal in 2007, when they already turned the land around into the South Buffalo commercial park, commercial industrial park. But the canal was still, had contaminated sediments, and they'd taken down the structure, but it wasn't really finished. But they put together a plan, and this is what it looked like from the air in 2015. You can see they cleaned up the park, they fixed the contamination at the bottom, they actually made some facilities for fishermen to wade in here, and you can get boats into it, and there's a bicycle trail around it. And they're developing this as parkland to support an expanded activity of this, what was a simple industrial park, with commercial facilities and office parks to take advantage of this amenity. So that's an example of one of those types of problems. The second one I talked about were environmental amenity with opportunity. There are 9 case studies that dealt with this. And take students out and see how they're done. And here's an example of Seneca Bluffs, 15 acres on the Buffalo River, south of downtown. It was actually a truck farm until the 40s and 50s, and then it was abandoned, and illegal material was dumped there, and environmental invasive species became the big problem. This is the site. Mugwort and Japanese knotweed and Phragmites australis just dominated the site. It was so thick it was really hard to even walk through it. They put together a plan to remediate the problems. So they dug up all the contaminated sites, the invasive species, got rid of the root material, and they started planting a ground cover of grasses and herbs. And the big plan was hardwood trees being planted there, because eventually, if those hardwood trees could grow and provide canopy, the invasives don't do well in the shade. So it's a long-term strategy. It's and to be honest, it's a very innovative strategy. I haven't seen it work anywhere. No one's been able to wait the 30 years until the trees are big enough. However, this was done in 2005. This was 2009. And you can see these hardwood trees are growing pretty well. And look at the beautiful ground cover. The big blue stem grasses and flowering plants. And they help keep the invasives under control. However, Japanese knotweed's a pretty tough customer. And it got in there anyway, so they had to go in and trade. But you can see this was taken in 2013, and the trees have gotten quite a bit bigger. It attracts some wildlife that's rather interesting. A 6-point buck was there one day on our field trip. So this is an example where they made a plan and are implementing it, but every year they have to go back and upkeep the site, make it a little better, keep it under control. The last category are these autonomous actor sites. And so you've got an organization that's not dependent on the public sector. They've got money, they can do things. And the one I'm going to talk about is a green infrastructure project that the Sewerage District, along with Riverkeeper, have been instrumental in. And they've taken a series of streets south of Buffalo, Delaware Park. I think this is Berkeley Place. And what they've done is, instead of letting the stormwater that used to flow into storm sewers and go to our sewage treatment plants, and huge problem, very expensive to treat all that rainwater. And it's such a problem that the treatment plant can't handle it, so we dump raw sewage into the rivers and lakes under heavy precipitation events because of all the stormwater. So here's a project where we're building rain gardens, and there's a curb cut, so no water goes into the sewer going down the street. It all goes into these rain gardens, which are constructed very deep with gravel on the bottom, and the water percolates into the ground instead of going into the storm sewer. The adjacent street is still left the same, and they're going to repair them at the end of the period pretty soon. And actually, the 2 streets over, there's one that has no rain gardens, but they tore up all the pavement and put in porous pavement. So when the rainwater goes right through the street and goes into the ground. They did the same thing in the commercial area. This is Elmwood Avenue, Panos, many of you recognize. Here, instead of going into the storm sewer, the water goes into the rain garden. And they put plantings that try to make it attractive. Some of the shop owners like it, some don't. a little controversial, but an interesting approach. So those are the examples of what the field trips teach and what I've been researching. And the pedagogy part is that it seems to me, I try to convince the students that the planning students in our degree program have a real role to play on these collaborative efforts to create plans and implement the plans. These plans are done, you've got experts, you've got scientists, you might have a groundwater specialist, you've got engineers, you might have a hydrologist, but you've also got the mayor and the public officials, you've got the neighbors of these projects all want us to have a say in it, there are nonprofits that want to have a say, and the planners have to have a role in this collaborative effort. And it seems to me they've got some experts. What did I do now? Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, there you go. I'm not going to touch this again. It works? Yes. So they're experts in land use impacts, intended future land use. When you clean up a contaminated site, typically the national and the state legislation says it has to be clean enough to support the intended future use of the site. So if you're cleaning up an old contaminated site, you can put warehouses on it. It doesn't have to be quite as clean as you're going to put houses on it. So they have to have expertise in that. The process of making plans is important. Being able to communicate with diverse public officials, stakeholders, and public, those are all skills that we teach in our programs. They have to, in our program, they learn how to balance short-term interests and long-term community goals. Some of the people in this process have different goals than others, and it's a real problem to get that. It's a skill to make it work. Divergent opinion, get them to agree on what is the problem, what are the goals, what's the preferred approach. And you also have to regulate not only present, but you've got to regulate future land uses to make sure people who are living in the neighborhoods are safe. The last two, environmental impact statements to balance environmental impacts with social and economic factors, and all the disciplinary experts. So, my argument is that our graduates can play an important role on these collaborative efforts to solve problems. But they need a broad brush understanding of specific environmental problems. We get students from all sorts of backgrounds. They have to have enough interest in the environment to learn about the problem. They've got to have confidence to read the documents and understand the basic level technical or scientific or engineering methods. They don't have to become experts in those fields, but they've got to know enough that they can sit down around the table and understand the conversation and contribute to it. They also, in doing that, they've got to learn enough of the basic jargon. It's hard to collaborate sitting around the table if people are using terms that you don't understand. So it's really important that they learn some of the jargon. And by reading course readings, discussions, papers, and things, it is my contention that our students learn these things. So I don't have anecdotal evidence to say that these things really work, but I'm interested in this. So this year, on Monday, I'm taking my class on a field trip, and the field trip leader is a graduate of our program. We're going to Grassroots Gardens, look out derelict property where they torn down houses in Buffalo. There was an empty lot there. Well, Grassroots Gardens is an organization that helps neighborhoods turn them into real gardens. So the person leading our field trip is a graduate of this program. The executive director of the organization is a graduate of this program. The former executive director is a graduate of this program. I ran in the hallway today a former graduate student who's now a professional planner in Niagara County, who was the project director of the field trip we're going on in about 3 weeks up in 18 Mile Creek in Niagara County. And we're doing another field trip this fall to Niagara Stella Preserve, a new project on the Niagara River that a graduate of our program is going to lead the field trip. So my point is that I think research and in our teaching, in our community outreach, can do all of these things, and I think that
citizens for the outer harbor, and that we are actually suing the city of Buffalo because they didn't do an environmental impact statement on building a 23-story proposed building on the outer harbor. So you have to not only know the lingo, but every now and then you have to be willing to step out and do something for that. I've been here a long time. I don't know what year did you come? I can't remember.
95.
Okay. I came in 1982. So I wasn't here at the very beginning. But I have been here, for a long time. And I thought it might be kind of interesting, and Al Price has been here longer than me, to talk a little bit about my interpretation of how I see this ecological commitment working over these last close to 35 years. And I'm going to talk primarily from an architectural perspective, but perhaps we could have a little bit of discussion about landscape or planning in a minute. I feel like there's been like about 4 errors, and that's my definition of what's going on. Is that we heard a great introduction to John Eberhard and the systems theory, and the idea of what they came in and what they wanted this school to be a challenge to traditional professional architectural education. And I know that they say the systems theory is like, oh, it was too rigid, it was too abstract, and stuff. But to me, what was so important about the use of the systems theory is that they were promoting an evidence-based design. That it wasn't only in the domain of art and personal expression, but that when you're making places for people, that it has to have some evidence in order to be able to present that. And I think that was very much a focus of the way that they did that work. A lot of things were going on at that period of history between, I'm saying, like 1970 to about 1980. And I'm just going to name a few of them. The same time as the schools got started was the same time, it was the origin of the Environmental Design Research Association, which is a professional organization now that's having 45 or however many years it's been working. And what was interesting about this organization, it was sort of like all of a sudden psychologists and sociologists discovered that people lived in places, that they were surrounded by environments and that those environments had an impact on things that actually were going on. And at the same time, architects suddenly realized that people inhabited their buildings, and so they realized that they had a lot to talk to each other about. And so that was the founding of the Environmental Design Research Association. And people like Michael Broyle, who was here for a very long time, John Archie, Scott Danford, you can think of a lot of people who were associated with the school were very active in that, and actually still are active in that particular thing. Ed Steinfeld, etc. So that was one thing that was happening within the professional domain at that particular time. But also to think about the fact that, I was just saying that that's when the ADA legislation, you start thinking about what was happening at that time, which brought together evidence-based design and also the relationship between people and environments and people and places. Very, very important. The other things that started to happen at this time, which I think is really critical, is nationally all sorts of things were happening. 1970, first Earth Day, right? In the 1970s was the passage of almost every important legislation, environmental legislation that ever happened in the United States of America. And we're still struggling, over some of those things. That was all going on at this particular time. So it became a period of time where if you were paying any attention to what was happening around you, the environment became suddenly very, very critical, and very, very important. Also, I want to say that at this point as well is that talk about John Eberhard came from the, why am I blanking on it? National Bureau of Standards. Thank you, National Bureau of Standards. And so he brought people like Winter Schmitz, who ran a program called Building Systems Technology. I was just talking to a couple of students who were saying when they were here during that period of time, is that they remembered they learned how to put buildings together. That really they understood the context of how that all worked. It became very important. Harold came in 1974 and added the whole program in design inquiry was a really important thing. So anything that I think about, like phase 2 of this, is this was sort of the context. In phase 2, I'm saying this is kind of when I arrived, and so again, it's still my interpretation about what was going on. I think about that as a period of time about when people we were starting to sort of organize a curriculum around things that would be considered to be environmental, so it's like climate and landscape architecture. When I came, it's the same time, it's almost the same year, Dennis Andreyko came. Those of you who've worked with him, it's climate, his major issue. Bob Shigley, we think of him the dean, but he was working as a Department of Energy on passive solar design when he came here. I came, Gary Day worked in urban and regional planning, Hiro Hata in urban design. So there was a lot of kind of influx into people concerned about the context within which architecture happened. But it could have always been more communication with planning, but this was within architecture itself. I know Andreyko and Steinfeld wrote a book on cold weather architecture. How do you think about architecture in cold climates? Something they ran a series of things on that. Remember the senior studio project at that time was that the students were given a building, a small facility, and they had to design it in 4 different climatic zones to see how living, if you were in Arizona or if you were in Maine, how would that building be different? It was exactly the same program. So there was a real attention to the notion that there could be a difference and that climate was starting to happen. It was the time where we started the Sustainable Futures program in Costa Rica, which was a study abroad program, but a study abroad program with a focus. So students went down, learned about tropical rainforest and how do you design in that kind of environment versus this kind of environment. We also put together, when the architecture program at that point realized that there were really different kind of areas of interest that people had, so we put together tracks. We've experimented curriculum-wise as a faculty many times in different ways, but this was the time we had tracks. And landscape and environment was one of them. We had a lot of students who participated. We also had one on accessibility and other things, and so students began to have an ability to sort of say, I want to learn more about this than everything else. And that was the beginning of the program. We have graduate groups now, as you know, that actually carry that whole idea forward. The first, I think about this time also, the International Panel on Climate Change, their first assessment came out in 1990. And the Rio de Janeiro Earth Summit happened in this time. So again, you start seeing all of the things that were happening across the world at that period really led on to thinking about it. And then I think we went into a hiatus. I mean, if you just even look at it from a political, cultural things, is when Clinton was, nominated and president, and it's sort of like we kind of went on this track and sort of didn't pay a lot of attention to some of those things that are going on. And I felt like that happened in the School of Architecture a little bit, is that we heard Mike talk about the fact that they really got into making. It's like the world, instead of going this way, became this way. And there was a lot of exploration of materials and things like that, but it was almost as if like the science base and all of that kind of stuff sort of got infused into almost a program in design. And I think that people who lived here during that time really were focusing on design with a big D. And those of us, who are doing this other stuff, continued doing our work, but it wasn't really the thrust of the school, and it wasn't the thrust of the nation. I think that there was, all of this stuff has, serious relationships to each other. But I would say that what's happening right now, probably again because there's been a huge shift in the whole culture of the world, in some respect, that we're reintroducing to a very, very large extent a lot of the environmental and ecological things that are happening. And it's happening more in the national consciousness as well. I'm sure that you all know that, although you never know it from the election, that there was climate change going on. So what I would like, I'm no longer teaching at the school, I'm retired, and so my ability to influence the curriculum is really limited. But I have some thoughts about how I would hope that things would develop in some way, so I'm going to just put those out there and say that. I think that we are facing probably the most critical issue that humans have ever faced, in terms of civilization with climate change that's going on right now. And I think that we're at a point where we're going to have to sort of deal with this cosmologically. I know that we don't talk about cosmology, but it actually, at its basis, is talking about what a worldview is and where humans sit within the whole context of the earth. And we've sort of developed this philosophy that we are somehow on top, or that we can kind of control things. That's what we're seeing. The earth is saying, well, sorry folks, you can't control things, that they have their own patterns, that they have things that they can actually do. And so, I don't know if you're in the world that talks about this, but people often talk about the triple bottom line, is that when making decisions, we have to make sure that the ecology and equity and economics get all balanced, et cetera, et cetera. Well, it's a lie. Because in point of fact, you would have nothing if it weren't for the earth. It's like if you just imagine anything, there is nothing that doesn't come from the earth. And so it's like what we haven't done and what we've been unable to do is to recognize our total dependence on the fabric of the earth. And so the irony of us destroying the fabric of the earth when in point of fact our lives depend on it is a kind of a form of insanity almost. But there's a wonderful anthropologist, his name was Edmund Carpenter, who once said, "We don't know who discovered water, but we can be sure it wasn't a fish." Think about that for a minute. It's like, so what happens is we live in a culture that teaches us certain things about how the world operates, and it's really hard to step outside of those things to see that something else is different. So, if you started to talk with your friends and say, "Oh, I think that, the earth is the most important thing and that, humans are just a very, very small part of it," they'll think you've gone crazy, right? Because our whole lives are organized around our own species. My dog thinks that dogs are the most important species on earth, right? So humans think that humans are the most important species on earth. But actually we're part of a web of life. And so we kind of have the typology upside down. And so think about, well, if we inverted that typology, what would the world be like? What would happen if we suddenly started to operate? And we have some indications, if you look at indigenous cultures, for example, that they very much think the Haudenosaunee, who's our native tribe in this area, that they have what they call the Thanksgiving prayer. Every day they stand up, thank the sun for the blessings, thank the rain for the, so just sort of the recognition about stuff as the earth gives you all of those things, as opposed to sort of having and taking all those things. The other thing that I think cosmologically we have to change is it's really interesting that about what we think we can change and what we think we can't change. So, for example, people say there's no way we're going to be able to limit climate temperature 2 degrees because people will never be able to do that. It's really not going to happen. You realize what you're saying when you say that? But anyway, so it's not going to happen. And yet, it's like, what in point of fact is that we can do that. We made it up. Human beings are really powerful because we actually can agree to do things together. That's what the whole planning is about, which is why it's such a powerful thing to be able to do. But you can't negotiate with physics. You're not going to be able to negotiate with what the natural processes are. We just can't do that. So what would happen if we turned those things upside down and started to say, well, this is fixed, but this can actually, be shifted. This can actually be changed. So a couple of things that were requests that I have. One is, I would wish to somehow get more integrated into the curriculum the whole question about how do we stop using fossil fuels. We actually know what the problem is. It's not like it's a complicated problem at one level. And I'm reminded of this story. I don't know whether you've ever heard this story before. It was a small village, and one day someone spotted a basket coming down the river, and it had a baby in it. Oh my God, it's like, so they rescued the baby, et cetera, et cetera. And then over the next month, there were more and more babies coming down in baskets, and they organized themselves, and they wrote a plan, and they figured out exactly how they were going to rescue all these babies and keep them out of the water, et cetera, et cetera. And then somebody said, where are all these babies coming from? And so that's the number one thing, is that we know where all these babies are coming from if we think about it as carbon in the air, and we got to stop it. And so investment programs, all kinds of things in which we can organize ourselves, to do that. Another thing I think planning and architecture students have so much to contribute to, building on both of, Wendy and Bill were talking about, is that we are going to have to help communities and people figure out how to live in this rapidly changing world. Things are going to be changing so quickly and so drastically that our expertise is going to be needed in such significant ways. Now, that's not instead of it. In a funny way, a lot of architects and planners think those are really fun things to do. How do we build ways to stop the sea from New York City? And, we can think about all this great infrastructure, but we can't do that only. We also have to stop it. Keep coming back to the babies, right? We have to stop it at the same time. But we have to make some hard decisions. Our culture needs to make some hard decisions about where we make future investments. What is going to happen? We get kids, grandkids. What their lives are going to be like. And so our research and our work is going to be so critical. And to have that be a central part of the curriculum, I think, would be very, very helpful. And then the last one, I come back to cosmology. Again, I don't know if you've read Naomi Klein's book on This Changes Everything. If we're going to make it past this crisis, and there is actually a chance that we won't, but if we're going to make it past this crisis in climate change right now, it's going to be because we've changed our cosmology. It's going to be because we changed the way we interact with the world, the way we assume our place in the world, what we decide to protect. And I think about the Standing Rock people in North Dakota. I don't know if you've been following the pipeline thing, and when they turn around and they say, we're not protesters, that we're protectors, we're protecting the earth. It's becomes a very wonderful, wonderful thing to think about. So anyway, so those are kind of, my requests. The three, we would try to stop these things from happening, number one. Secondly, we try to figure out how to make a good life for people in a rapidly changing place that's going to be very, very stressful. And the third one is how do we for ourselves and get other people to start thinking differently so that that shift in how we think about this is not as a specialty. Environmental issues shouldn't be a specialty. This is the world, this is the earth, this is our life. And I wanted to close with a quote by Taylor Denishaban, and he wrote this in 1957. He said, "The day is not far when humanity will realize that biologically it is faced with a choice between suicide and adoration." And I hope we choose adoration. Okay.
Thank you.
All right, so being the youngest one here, I don't have much to talk about in terms of the past. So what I'll focus a little bit more is on the present and sort of the future of where the curriculum can go. So I had the privilege or nightmare, depending on what perspective you look at it as, of serving as the project manager for the Girl Home, UB's entry into the Department of Energy Solar Decathlon. So for those of you who don't know, the Solar Decathlon is held every 2 years by the Department of Energy, where 20 universities from around the world are invited to design, build, market, and operate basically a net zero house that's powered strictly by the sun and nothing else. So the Solar Decathlon is broken up. It's called Decathlon because there's 10 different contests, and they range across a large variety of different specialties, ranging not just from architecture and engineering, but also to the market appeal, to communications and affordability. So because of all these different contests and the complex makeup of the Solar Decathlon, we had to really branch out across the university and incorporate students and faculty from not just the School of Architecture and Planning. So not just within the School of Architecture and Planning, but also reaching out to School of Engineering and Applied Sciences, the School of Management, the College of Arts and Sciences, even reaching out to ESF out in Syracuse to talk to them about landscape architecture and that sort of thing. So in the end, we ended up having, looking at the final numbers, we had over 200 students and faculties, 13 different departments across 5 different schools. All of them working on the same exact project, working towards making this one ultra-efficient house that's powered just by the sun, and market it and hopefully win this prestigious international competition. So just going through some photos here. This particular session is between some of the architecture and engineering students at UB collaborating with some of the students at the landscape architecture program at ESF from Syracuse. So there were a couple different times where the students and the faculty from ESF came out here to Buffalo, and we had these charrettes, these full-day charrettes, a couple different times where we were really able to share knowledge between the different professions in ways that isn't really taught anywhere else within the university. This is a really unique opportunity that the students and even the faculty were able to get by working together. The Solar Decathlon itself is a competition, but this photo shows in a way a form of camaraderie between all the different teams. So this is out in California where the competition took place. This was at a design development workshop where all the teams got to meet each other for the first time, and we got to survey the site where the house was going to go. So this is one of our construction managers here who had learned how to survey a site with the equipment, and he was teaching these students from the team from West Virginia. He was teaching them how to use that equipment and how to survey their site. So yeah, we're competing against each other, and we're shooting for that first place prize, but really it's about everyone in this competition had this same goal, the same objective in mind of really advancing the conversation on sustainability and that sort of thing. So in a way, we're all sort of partners in this, and we're helping each other out however we can. Not only working within the university and all the different departments and that sort of thing, but also working with the community. We had to build a house, so we had to get all the materials, we had to raise the money. This wasn't just a sketch on a piece of paper and pin it up in front of a bunch of critics. We had to actually build this thing. So we had to go out to the community, we had to talk to potential donors and sponsors, talk to alumni from the university. And we had a lot of different events where we had the students on the team and the faculty engaging directly with professionals in the industry. So whether it be with engineering firms, with architecture firms, with material manufacturers, distributors, we invited all sorts of people to come and talk to us about this particular project, generate interest, and really continue this conversation between the academic world and the industry in terms of really progressing this conversation. So it's a really great opportunity for the students to talk directly with the industry professionals. Again, not something you don't see too much of directly within the curriculum that this project was able to do. And this is sort of a brief list of just many of the different donors and the sponsors and the companies and the individuals who came together for this one project and really made it happen. They contributed, and all of these companies are now partners in a way with the university that were not before. So we've made a bunch of partners with the university. We've also strengthened a bunch of other existing partnerships. So it is a really great opportunity. Going back to the student sense, integrating this into the curriculum, our specific goal that we really take pride of with our particular team was we relied as less as possible hiring professionals to come in and build this house. We wanted the students to build as much of it as possible to really get that real world experience. This is a shot of a couple of the students on the team actually putting up the structurally insulated panels which serve as our envelope for the house. So sure, we reached out and we talked to the manufacturer and the distributor for these wall panels, and he would come out and he would teach the students how to do it, but we never hired a contractor to come in and do it. Instead, the individual came and taught us, and then we as a team, as the students, we built the house. And that's something not many teams within the Solar Decathlon can truly say that the students did the majority of the work. We actually built this house from scratch. And then out there in California, which is where the competition actually took place last October, we had to, of course, ship the house. We built it here in Buffalo and then shipped it across the country. A huge logistical challenge in of itself. And then reassembling it out on this parking lot at an old Air Force base in California. We had 2 weeks. large group of students go out there, well, not really that large, pretty small actually, put this house together over the course of a week and a half or two out there in California, really put it together. Again, it was all the students doing this work. It wasn't really, we had a couple professionals. You'll see one of the guys right there on the right there. He was one of just a couple professionals that we brought out with us to help us out, but really largely it was the students doing all this work. It was the students operating that heavy machinery. It was the students erecting the steel for the canopy to support the solar panels, which was really a truly extraordinary experience to show how you can integrate this real world application or this real world problem into the curriculum. So this is just going to go through a couple quick photos of the finished product out there in California for the competition, which, by the way, we're in the process of putting this thing together again. Hopefully this semester it'll be reassembled on this campus, right on the quad right here in front of HAYES Hall. So hopefully in the next month or two you'll see this thing start going up again. But these are just some of the finished shots out there in California. Again, this is largely all students designing and building this house. It was powered by solar panels that produced far more energy than the house actually consumed, so we were net plus. The whole concept, which I'll get to in a second, revolved around this idea of urban farming, urban gardening. So the occupant of the house is really growing out their own food. We wanted to highlight the topic of energy, not just in terms of solar power and solar panels, but the energy inherent in large-scale food systems. So when we think about ecology and our commitment to the ecology, it's not just about electricity, it's also about energy in large-scale food systems. So, hopefully I pause this thing. In the end, we ended up placing top 5 in all 10 of the individual contests and got us a place of 2nd overall in a pool of 20 teams that were invited to compete from around the world in this one competition to design and build the house. So, and just to put it into perspective, let's see if I can pause this. There we go. Just to put it into perspective, the first place team only beat us by 9 points out of a total of 1,000. So each of the 10 different contests is worth 100 points for a total of 1,000. First place only beat us by 9 points, so that's less than 1% of the total points possible. And they have competed in this competition before. This was our first time competing, and they outspent us by quite a bit as well. So for our first time competing, the project really shows how successful the university was able to be in terms of creating this architectural and engineering concept that really pushed the conversation. So in a sense, it was successful in multiple different ways. Not only did we earn 2nd place, and we got this big, pretty silver trophy that's sitting in the dean's office right now, but it was also a success in terms of bringing many people together. So bringing different departments within the university together. Like I mentioned before, there were at least 13 different departments from across the university involved with the making of this one project. I don't think that's really ever happened in UP history before. So being able to bring all the students together in the same room and work on the same project was really a great experience. Not only the students, but also the faculty, developing and strengthening the relationships between the departments in the university itself. So now there's a stronger relationship between, for example, the School of Architecture and the School of Engineering now, where the faculty know each other and they know what each other are capable of and working together. Bringing the community, the different organizations and the industries together, not just different companies together on the same project, but bringing companies and forming relationships with the university there as well. So really creating this house that really pushed the idea of sustainability, not, like I said, not just with electricity and solar panels, but also about large-scale food systems. bringing all these different people together to talk about the same exact thing and produce a product that performed and put UB and the region on an international stage in a successful manner. So just to close out real quick, I want to end on 2 quick quotes. Actually, this one is a little bit lengthy, but thinking about this quote, we didn't really use this quote when we were making the project itself, but looking back on the project, this quote really stands out in terms of we were really focused. The Solar Decathlon was all about solar power and creating a product that is net zero by using PV panels. From the very beginning, our goal with the Grow Home was not to focus on just solar energy, because there's so much more to focus on in the broad topic of sustainability than solar power. The urban agriculture, the urban farming, really growing your own food for your family, taking energy out of the large-scale food systems was a critical component of our concept. So this quote by Jason McLennan, who was the founder of the Living Building Challenge, which is considered the greenest of all standards in our industry. He makes this great analogy between buildings and flowers. And I'll skip right towards the latter half, really the meat of this quote. The flower must receive all of its energy from the sun, all of its water needs from the sky, and all its nutrients from the soil. Flowers are also ecosystems, supporting and sheltering microorganisms and insects, just as our buildings support and shelter us. Equally important, flowers are beautiful and can provide inspiration needed for architecture to truly be successful. So with the Grow Home, we were focused on so many different things. It's really not just about one specific area within sustainability. It's about hitting this much broader topic and making, why do we have any sort of bad buildings per se? So the last quote here is kind of goes to this idea of where the current industry is and where we need to go. So there's this idea that all these buildings there's a lot of bad environmental buildings out there right now. And there's a lot of standards being proposed like LEED and Energy Star and Passive House and others that are really striving to make our environmentally bad architecture less bad, which is a good stepping stone per se. But it's just that, it's just a stepping stone. We make it less bad, but it's still bad. So why are we doing that? Why aren't we striving even further? So this final quote by the International Living Future Institute, instead of a world that is merely a less bad version of the one we currently have, why aren't we designing, why aren't we seeing what good actually looks like? So that was a Grow Home, and I'll wrap up there.
To add on top of what everybody just said, I wanted to say that our faculty and students have also engaged in interdisciplinary research in macro-related research using ecological approach, specifically obesity-related research. So I won't go into detail on that because of the time. Now we're going to open to the audience to see if you have any questions.
I'll say something. It's really great, you know, the whole sort of vast world and the different ways to look at it. And I'm just wondering, I mean, in terms of the future of planning, I was listening to you speak about this house, and that's extremely inspiring. And, you know, the LEED programs that are out there, it's not necessarily all the new buildings that need to be LEED certified, but to take something and rehabilitate it rather than discard it and fill up the piles of waste that we humans create. So there is a positive thing there as well. But the one thing that no one is really talking about is the way that we live now. We all sort of went out to the suburbs, and that was just an ecological disaster. And we're concentrating more in the cities, but people living in the cities are living in their cities a little bit differently with this on-demand economy. So a person that doesn't go to the store in their car to buy their groceries, but has everything delivered, is putting about 30 to 40 cars on the street for the same thing. And I'll tell you, I mean, I live in San Francisco, and I'm in the eye of this storm, and it is, I'm actually thinking of going back to school to see if I can come up with a solution. But the kid that lives downstairs has his coffee delivered in the morning with a car. No, but this is where we're going. He's always on his phone, which is fine, because that's where he works. But when he has dinner, it gets delivered. If he needs toilet paper, that gets delivered. It gets delivered separately than his case of water. And then all of these big, huge tankers that are bringing all this stuff that we consume into each day, into our bay, hover, and they hover just outside of the boundary of the international water line. Why do they do that? Their CFC emissions do not get counted. It's only when they cross over, so they do it quickly. They wait for a dock to be open, they come in, unload the shit really quick, stuff really quickly, and then they go right back out again, and they burn the stuff. You think our cars do anything? You can run every car on the planet for days, and you will not meet the stuff that gets emitted from these tankers, because they burn the sludge that we can't even use in our cars. So we are at an extreme crisis, and I'm thinking, I'm kind of sorry that I had kids of my own, because I'm thinking, where are we going? And this is to your point, Lynda, and it's complete behavior change. You know, all of this way that we live and the consolidation of like all of the things that we consume into Amazon. I mean, who is it? Where are they? Who do they employ? And the Walmarts with their robots that can ship us. Oh, I need an aspirin and I need it in an hour. And then, oh, I'm okay because I want my fancy car and I'm paying some sort of fine to offset my emissions. And that becomes okay. But this is the really great one. I don't own a car, therefore I'm above. But when I step out on my sidewalk, I want the Uber to be there within 3 seconds. If it doesn't come, I will cancel it. So you've got all these Uber drivers and the Lyft drivers hovering around, driving to pick you up. But you don't own the car, so therefore you feel really good about your consumption. And it's a different way to be on this planet. And rather than going toward the place where I would love for I think it's actually getting worse. And it's policy, it's our perception of what we do as a person and how it ties into the environment. We're further disconnected, and it's kind of maddening. But anyway, that was it. So it wasn't really a question, it was a rant.
That's also divided by class.
Pardon me?
It's very classic. Divided by class.
Yeah,
Not
very,
everybody
very,
knows it, yeah.
very.
You know, it reminds my trip back to China this past summer. It's like I'm from a totally different world because people buy everything online and it's delivered within several hours or even one day. So you can buy a dress and then you get it tomorrow morning. So it's so fast, and you buy your lunch, dinner, everything online, and I can't get a taxi because I don't have the software to get a taxi, like you said, Uber. So in China we use DD. So I don't have that software, and I was standing there 15 minutes and nobody stopped for me. I feel like, you know, I'm from a, entirely different world, but this whole thing, I mean, it's changing our behavior and changing also, and it's something to, make us think how we should design and plan the future with this whole change and how to protect the environment from a different perspective, to look at this from a different perspective.
So this is not going to answer the question. I've been very deep into the ecological resilience literature for a couple of years. resonates with a lot of what I learned here. But, and it's, Bill, it sort of goes to what you said earlier about planning. I've always been terribly fond of the vision and sort of what do we want in the future, and it might be that that's not what we need to do right now. I mean, I don't want to give up on an ideal thought that we have of a good city. That's something that I believe is important, but we are going to go through a period of incredible disruption, and I don't think we can plan out 50 years or 100 years and say, here we are now, and what do we have to do to get there? And the resiliency literature, it's about, in education, about teaching students and teaching ourselves about building our capacity to change and to understand things as they're very fluid, which is a whole new way of, I think, approaching education. I don't know what it means exactly, but that's sort of where I'm headed, that some of it's psychological. How are you resilient as a person? But how do we build that into our institutions, the way we think about our communities, so that everyone has the capacity to change as conditions change, as disruptions happen, and I think planning can be really good there, because we do know how to work, how people work together. And that's the only way that we'll develop that capacity.
If I could jump in on that, I really like your quote. We don't want the less bad, we really want to jump to something really good. Clearly that is what we want to do, but we can't take an eraser and erase the built environment and say, let's turn immediately to the really good. We've got to realize where we want to get, and we've got to have a plan to get us there. And there are going to be some incremental steps that maybe we want to make it a little less bad. We better start making them pretty darn quickly. But nonetheless, we've got to have a vision of where we want to go and a plan to get there, and have incremental steps to make it less bad in the interim. So I think both of those things are right. We need to move there quickly.
As you know, Bill, I teach housing, have done for a long time. And the fact is, we replace about 2% of the U.S. housing stock annually. But it's 2%. It isn't compounded as teach finance. But if we got a different 2% built to new standards, like the row house or better, and we did that as a matter of social commitment, at least we're making some kind of an incremental dent while we figure out what else to do. If simultaneously every new building was LEED certified, every big commercial product, then we're making even more of a dent. So at a policy level, there are things I think we could do. But I think Lynda has a point, and that is until and unless the worldview shifts, we're going to find ourselves in a real quandary. I was depressed deeply about 6 years ago when the regents, public guardians of education in the state of Kansas, elected to remove all reference to Charles Darwin and his work from elementary and secondary school textbooks. So there are parts of our country where the level of enlightenment around certain kinds of issues is nowhere near what it's like, even close to us, and we're no model of sobriety. So it does seem to me that one of the things that is in order is a better approach to environmental education. I'm willing to wager that basically every high school, public high school in the country teaches some version of old-fashioned earth science. And I'll bet you a fat man that they're pretty poopy courses. So we've got a vehicle, if we could figure out ways to step into that and start by teaching ecology and environment instead of earth science, no matter what we call it. And I just kind of have my fingers crossed that some of us, particularly our senior educators, will think about ways to influence public education curriculum, because that may be another component of what changes the mindset. I don't know how else to do it. The facts are powerful when we marshal them. And I think even little kids get it. So if we started by saying, I remember one of my graduate students in planning, he was in class, and I made some kind of a snide, off-the-cuff remark about, do you guys still run the water while you brush your teeth? And he said, oh, no. I said, really? Because I use a little cup, so I use that much water to brush my teeth, right? I said, really? Where did you learn that? And he said, Barney. Barney teaching ecology, right? But there are ways, is my point. And I just don't think we have even thought about it. Despite all of our expertise, we haven't thought about influencing the systems that are creating the mentality that we then say we need to work on. So I think we need to get busy on that. My former dean at another institution instituted a program in environmental education that I thought was really right on. I'm sad to report to you it's no longer taught. So, here we are. Comment on question.
Any other comments or questions? If not, I think time is actually.
There's a break refreshments.
Yeah. Thank you for coming. Thank you.